So in this video, we are going to look at how the checklist basically functions in the system. So let's look at violations first. As we've already trained earlier, the violations are divided into four major categories: administrative, critical, major, and general. And in the system, when you click on the inspection program, you would see the violations are divided into administrative and public health hazards. And if you click on public health hazards, the violations that are critical, major, and general category will open for you. Each violation in the system can be marked in different conditions. So if you can see here, you can see the critical violations. It can start with no violation, condition 1, condition 2, condition 3, condition 4, and condition 5. And in the Excel sheet, you will also see what are the points that you lose for condition 1, condition 2, condition 3, condition 4, and condition 5 respectively. You will also see the rules written on this side saying that condition 1 should be B grade. So if you get a critical violation with condition 1, it will be definitely a B grade. And if it's a major violation, it would get a C grade with just one violation if the violation is in condition 5. So the rules are clearly written here, so you can go through it whenever you get time. And also the scoring ranges are given at the bottom. It explains how much score you should get in terms of percentage for getting an A plus, how much should you get for A, B, C, D, and E respectively. This sheet also tells you how many days would be the gap for inspections for high risk, medium risk, and low risk groups, and based on the grades, how much would the inspection frequency change. At the bottom, you would see grading rules and how the grading rules would apply for each type of premises. You can see how the cards are given. So a green card would be if you have four or fewer general violations with no critical and major violations. A red card would be uh, for establishments that get one critical or two or more major violations or seven or more general violations. If a red card is issued, a follow-up inspection should be scheduled within 3 days. And if the follow-up is not conducted, then the notification would go to the senior. So the yellow card ones are the establishments that get one major violation or 5 or more general violations. And even for the yellow card, a follow-up inspection is scheduled, but it's done within 10 business days. And a follow-up is scheduled only after the corrective action has been taken. A white card is issued after the corrective action has been taken, and so if you get a red card, you take the establishment would take corrective action, and once the corrective action is taken, a white card is issued by the inspector, and they have to wait until the next routine inspection to get a green card if there are no more violations in the premises. So this is a quick example of how violations are marked, and in the next few checklists, you will see how each violations are categorized. So as I mentioned earlier, each violation has got a no violation column, and then you also have to mark conditions in it based on what the extent of the violations are. So if the degree of violation is lower, you mark a lower condition. If the extent of violation is higher, then you mark higher conditions. One of the things that you need to look at is if you click on the master list, you will see the entire list of routine inspection violations, and you can find the violation description in this column. And here you can see on the right how many violations how many conditions are open for each type of violation. So if you take the the critical category, you can see that in high-risk businesses, there are very few options to mark. So you can either mark condition 3 or 4 or 5. You cannot mark condition 1 and 2. That is because the risk of the premises is very high. So even if it's a small violation, you have to mark it as condition 3 and 4. That would mean that they will get a red card. So if you are in a high risk premises like a school canteen, which is supplying a lot of food to children, then you have to mark the violation either as condition 3 or 4. You cannot mark condition 1 and 2. In the case of low risk premises, there are certain violations you can mark, the conditions down. Say, for example, cold food should be held below 5 degrees centigrade. So if you are in a grocery store, if one or two foods are outside temperature control, you can mark lower conditions. But in a high risk premises, such as a larger restaurant, large catering company, you cannot use that. So you need to say that, you know, you're a high risk premise, you produce a lot of food, so you cannot afford to have temperature abuse. So that means the conditions that are marked in high risk premises should always be higher. And this has to be linked to the risk categorization that we talked about in the previous video. So higher risk premises would have lower, you know, differences for conditions. But if the risk of the premises is lower, in a low risk business such as a grocery store, you have more conditions to mark. So you can mark from 1 to 5. So that's how the system works. And then you can look at general violations and major violations also from here. You can see that the varying conditions are used for different levels of risk, and you can find out as to what applies to what risk in this Excel sheet. Right, so that's simply explaining how the risk and the conditions work. Let's look at some of the administrative violations and see how they're marked. So in administrative violations, you do not have conditions. You only have yes or no questions. So you need to check whether the establishment complies with the requirements or not. So when you open your system and start performing the inspections, you will only see these questions. But what you need to know is the information that is given in this Excel sheet. So to know that an establishment is complying with something, you need to know what exactly are the requirements, right? So here you can also see column subcategories 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 for that particular violations. You will be expected to know what are these checks that you need to know so that you can mark it as no violation. That means if you're complying, that means you've checked all these aspects and you've confirmed that they exist. So if it's a license, you need to know whether the license is renewed, the license is current, and if it's a business activity, you need to know that the business activity is relevant to the type of work. So let's look at the establishment that as valid trade license. So if you're taking this as an example, you can see that the establishment should carry out all activities based on the business activity approved in the license. And specific permits may apply for outdoor catering, sale of foods during Ramadan, events and stuff like that. So you need to also verify whether there are any special permits required for the type of operation they are doing. Subcategories for this would be looking at the license and the business activity. You may want to ask questions like, do you do any outdoor catering? And if you do so, then can you show me the permit? Do you supply to schools? If you supply to schools, can you show me the permit? And if you sell food outside, the business approved area, then you might want to mark it as non-compliant. So food is only allowed to be sold in a specific location. So if they're selling it in a different location, then you can use the same violation that they're performing business which is not within the license of the premise. So to put things simple, administrative violations have only yes or no questions. So if you have verified these documents which have been listed in the subcategories, and if you find that they're complying with it, then you give no violation there, and you say they are complying with the violations. If you look at public health hazards, you see a whole list of violations, and I've listed a few examples here as to how you can verify those. Let's look at cooking as an example. So here is cooking. So here, the violation states that raw animal products that are sold should be cooked to 75 degrees centigrade or equivalent. The food code clause reference is given here. That means the establishment has to comply with all the requirements that are listed in the code. So inspectors also expect to know those requirements. And when you are going there, you cannot mark a no violation unless you check and make sure that all raw animal foods that are likely to be undercooked are cooked to a specific temperature, that's 75 degrees centigrade, and the staff should be able to demonstrate that that the cooking is done properly and they're monitoring in terms of records or something like that. Now, having said this, it doesn't mean that every establishment has to have a record. If they're an establishment that is only cooking rice and thick gravies which are boiled for a long time, they don't need to really check the temperatures because you know that cooking temperatures have definitely hit more than 100 degrees centigrade. So your job would be to look at the menu and find out the foods that are likely to be undercooked. So you might find kebabs that are likely to be undercooked. You might find grilled chicken that is likely to be undercooked. Those are the foods that you want the PIC or the chef to check. And you have to verify whether they're actually doing it. So you can tell them, can you show me how you're checking the temperature of this food and how you're monitoring this temperature? So if they're not able to show that, this is a violation. So do not mark it no violation unless you are sure that they're checking it. So this is not a visible thing unless you specifically look for that problem. Now, if it's a very small problem here, it's only affecting one or two portions of food, and it's a very low risk business, you can mark condition 1 or 2. But in high risk premises, you will only have condition 3 and 4 open because the risk is defined as high. So you might want to look at condition 3 and 4. So even if it's one food that is not cooked properly in a high risk premises, such as schools or large hotels, you would want to give a red card, and that is a violation. You can correct the violation on site. You can tell them to cook it properly, but still it has to be a violation under red card category, and the establishment has to convince you that the corrective action has been taken, and the evidence should be supported in terms of training, competency assessments, and stuff like that. In another violation, the approach would be slightly different. So let's look at something like hazardous substances and lubricants and chemicals and cleaning materials and pesticides shall be approved for intended use, properly labeled and stored securely. You can look at the food code requirements and you can see the whole lot of classes mentioned there. But when you say hazardous substances, lubricants, and pesticides, you can see that there is a huge variation in the type of nature of the chemicals that are being used, right? You could have a harmless chemical that is used like hydrogen peroxide, which is not really toxic if it goes into the food, or you can have something like a cockroach spray that could be really deadly, or some chemical that can really kill people, right? So you have to use the same violation code, but you have to show that something is more dangerous than the other. So condition 5 would be really finding some poisonous chemical along with the food with no measure to prevent contamination. That would be condition 5. That's a disaster, and that could be really lethal. It could kill people or it could harm people significantly. Condition 1 would be a harmless chemical, not labeled properly and stored along with the food, or just one of these. So if it's a very very small issue, the impact is lower, then you can mark it as condition 1. But if you expect the impact to be higher, and this impact could be either because the chemical is too dangerous, or it's a medium, like it's not very harmful, but it is likely to be affecting a lot of people. Say for example, chlorine is stored along with the food without any identification, and then it is very likely that it is going into the food. So or the dosage is not really controlled, or a lubricant is used which is not really food grade, so and it's stored along with the food. In these cases, you might want to consider marking condition 3 or 4 depending on what is the likelihood of the contamination and what is the likely effect on people. So things change when you talk about conditions. So you need to use your ability to judge in marking conditions differently under these categories. Let's look at another violation. Food shall be obtained from approved sources with proper records and inspected upon arrival. Now, here again, you can see the food code references. There are whole